Today, Gaming America is speaking with Bill Miller, the president and CEO of the American Gaming Association. We will be discussing major trends affecting the industry today, as well as things for the upcoming year. Mr. Miller, thank you so much for speaking with us.
Very happy to be here.
My first question, I suppose, is a bit of a personal one. I just wanted to know a brief history of yourself and how you wound up at this position in your career.
Well, I feel like, when you get to a certain point in your career, you kind of look back and you do wonder, how the heck did I get to this place? But I have, for most of my career, been either in government at the federal level or as an advisor to government, either in communications or as a lobbyist or in the political environment. And so for me, I've been now here as president and CEO of the American Gaming Association for just over 3 years. Prior to that, I worked for a group called the Business Roundtable, which was an advocacy organization made up of 204 Fortune 500 CEOs. And so, and then before that, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I spent some time as a chief of staff to a member of Congress, about 9 years, and did a lot of work in politics and ran campaigns and those sorts of things. And so my background really is in government, advising government and doing that sort of thing. And so I had always been in and around the trade association space. And when this opportunity came, when there was a vacancy at the CEO level here, I'd had a couple people come to me and say, hey, you'd be a good fit for this. And, because of, I had known Jim Murren, who was the previous CEO of MGM, pretty well because he was a Business Roundtable CEO. And I'd known Sheldon Adelson for a long time from my work at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And then I'd known some of the other folks that were in the supplier side of the business. And so I just started talking to them. And the more I talked, the more interested I became. And, here we are now 3 years later, and I couldn't be happier.
Indeed. It's an interesting industry, and it's going through an interesting change at the moment, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredibly dynamic.
Yeah. Well, moving on to some of that, I would like to talk or ask about regulation. What would the ideal, in the view of the American Gaming Association, what would the ideal sort of regulation look like for the gaming industry?
Well, I think one of the important things to remind folks, and that is that by and large, the regulation for the gaming industry in the U.S. is regulated at the tribal and state levels, and we like it that way. We think that this is the right fit in the states, and that is very different than many other countries, particularly in Europe, where there is a federal overlay in terms of the regulatory. We have 4,000 regulators, that work at the state and tribal level that understand the business. They were enabled by statute in the state capitals in those places, or in the case of tribes, tribal compacts negotiated with governors in particular states. And that we think that the federal government's role should be a limited one. And that because there are some states that want to see different types of gaming, whether it be some states want lotteries, some states want integrated resort casinos, some states want to have online options and sports betting only, and then there are some states, we've got a couple of states in the US that they don't want to see gaming at all, and that's okay. And so in the U.S., I think federalism is really kind of the word that we think and talk about a lot, and that is that powers not articulated specifically by the Constitution should be regulated to the states and relegated to the states, and that's how the industry works, and that's how the industry works really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the U.S. is a much bigger country and market than what you'd find over here in Europe. Um, I was wondering as well about the coming year. Are there any major regulatory initiatives that we can expect in 2022?
Well, I think one of the things that we, as I talk about our strong preference and strong belief that the states are the places that best regulate the industry. There is also a role for the federal government to play here and we saw it in a very positive dynamic just a couple of years ago in the CARES Act, which was really this federal bill that was an aid package that benefited and supported businesses of all sizes, smallest to largest, and included the gaming industry for the first time ever. And so, this was a $2 trillion bill to support businesses of all sizes in the states. And all these federal relief packages that had gone before them, whether it was, after the Great Recession in 08 and 09, or Hurricane Katrina, or other important, 9/11. In all of those cases, when the federal government handed out aid and assistance to businesses, they carved out the gaming industry and intentionally. And so, for the first time ever recently, we were treated just the same as every other business in America. And I think that that's a reflection of what we mean in the communities in which we operate, and that people see that the gaming industry shouldn't be discriminated against or persecuted, but that when we're larger than the US airline industry and we employ people, in significant numbers and rebuild communities and pay higher taxes in the states in which we operate than any other business, that we should be given the same level of assistance when the federal government has that opportunity. And so we're very grateful that happened. We want to continue to see, to the degree that Congress is moving to support, increased business travel, opening up of trade shows and encouraging trade shows and conferences. Those are really important things. And there are bills in the Congress that we think could be helpful there. But we also really want to make sure that we want to protect against federal overreach. We want to make sure that gaming stays regulated at the state level. And then in terms of, modernization, we see these really exciting developments in terms of payment modernization. When I took this job, when I was a candidate for the job and in my early days going around talking to people, I would say the same thing. It's like, how can this industry be the last cash-based industry along with, garage sales and flea markets? It doesn't make sense. We're leaders in entertainment. We're leaders in retail. We're leaders in restaurants and nightclubs and all of the other amenities and technology. What you see on the casino floor is an amazing, electronic display of innovative technology and entertainment. But yet, if you want to go play craps or learn it for the first time, you've got to either go to an ATM machine and pay a big fee, or carry cash in with you. And that, that always kind of made me scratch my head and say, all right, so what do we need to do to modernize this? Because if people aren't using if they're not carrying cash around with them, and then they're going to go on the casino floor, and then they're going to say, oh, I can't do it that way. I can't pay the same way I pay for my Starbucks coffee or my room at your hotel or your property. Then it's going to be a disincentive for me to experiment with, blackjack or table games or even slots. And so what we've seen is regulations have been in some ways held back the industry in terms of digital transformation, but we're seeing massive improvements and really exciting dynamics in and around that. And part of it was regulatory hurdles that we had to get past. Part of it was banking issues that we had to get past. Part of it was reluctance among the operators who didn't want to change necessarily the way in which they felt the consumer wanted to transact. And we had to show them that, number one, when you have cash, you have to count it, you have to store it, you have to safeguard it. It doesn't create any value for you when it's in your basement. And oh, by the way, lots of people like to steal it, whether or not, and so you have to build casinos that look like fortresses. You have to have people with, weapons in there to ensure that the safeguarding of that cash. And we're so committed as an industry to anti-money laundering and bank secrecy that creating digital transactions really help us and help federal authorities and law enforcement better understand source of funds and those sorts of things that are critical to ensure that politicians and regulators recognize how important we find the notion of source of funds and want to be good and strong partners with our federal law enforcement and state law enforcement around money laundering.
Sure. And to be a bit of a devil's advocate here, wouldn't you say, though, that if you go cashless, there's a whole new slew of cybersecurity problems that you're going to have to worry about?
Yeah. Hey, look, if hackers can get into the Pentagon, they can get into, a casino property or an online sports book. There's no question about that. And so, but, our industry is vigilant. Our industry recognizes that, our consumer data is critically important to safeguard. It is critically important for us to, protect their data and their privacy. And while I continue to advocate for the modernization of payments, I'm not suggesting that casinos should go cashless. I think that there will always be a market for people that want to go and transact in cash. And I don't think that we should dissuade or discourage that. I just think that we should open up the aperture around making our industry, that is a very consumer facing industry, one that transacts in a way that consumers are accepting and modernizing. So I absolutely believe data protection, privacy, these are incredibly important issues that every business struggles with, and our business is no different. But our business invests a lot of money. Our businesses invest a lot of money in technology and technology around protection of data and protection of privacy.
Sure. I wanted to go back a little bit to what you were saying about sort of states' rights and federal overreach. Is there a fear or a rising tension in Washington that as the regulated gaming industry continues to grow and becomes quite the behemoth, that the federal government will train its sights on it a little bit more in a more complete way than it has to this point?
Look, I think it should always be a concern. I get paid to be paranoid, so I think that there should always be some level of worry that the federal government can kind of come in. But we have a pretty good and recent example of the federal government stepping in and, in essence, preventing legal sports betting in America. PASPA was a federal statute that prevented all 49 states, with the exception of Nevada, from legally offering sports betting, despite the fact that people bet on sports. Americans bet on sports in the same way that folks in the UK and other countries bet on sports. And so what the federal government did with that statute was they enabled the illegal market. They basically greenlit the illegal market. And, you kind of wonder if there's a better example of why the federal government should stay out of our business. It's hard to find one. Because when PASPA was invalidated by the Supreme Court, what we saw was massive and very quick exercise of the legislatures around the country to say, thank you, Supreme Court, by allowing us to give our citizens the opportunity to bet on sports in a safe, responsible, transparent, and legal marketplace, and not drive them to online offshore websites that may or may not pay you if you win, or enable organized crime to to use bookies and those sorts of things to bet on sports. And so it's hard to find a better example of when the federal government gets into the gaming industry. Their track record's been pretty terrible.
Yeah, but you haven't heard of any rumors afoot in the post-PASPA world of federal regulations coming in at all?
There's always some member of Congress that for some particular reason wants to move this into this space. But I think that, we spend a lot of time up on the Hill. We spend a lot of time with the administration. We spend a lot of time with the previous administration. There's no movement afoot to, bring a federal agency or a federal overlay onto a business that works quite well at the state level and the tribal level. And so, we'll be ever vigilant as it relates to that. But we now have, we're in 44 states around the country. And in every one of those states, we're the highest taxpayer of business in each one of those states. And so while the Congress doesn't necessarily see the financial benefit of us being in these states, we've got an army full of governors and legislators in state capitals that they'd fight harder than the AGA probably to prevent the federal government from coming in and taking their money and their oversight away when they're doing a good job. And so we have a very strong army of advocates who understand what we have done and you have to remember, in many of the communities, when the states open up, particularly brick and mortar, they basically designate what the sites are going to be. And when they do that, they do it in places that have been abandoned by other industries. And so, you take some place like, it's Ohio or Pennsylvania or upstate New York. These are places that, economically have been depressed for decades. And they say, you know what, we'd like, the Pennsylvania legislature is going to open up and say, we're going to open up for X number of casinos. And we're going to say it should be in a brownfield site, or it should be in a place that's been underserved with very high unemployment, because they recognize what we mean in the communities. And what we mean in the communities is jobs and economic growth. And so when that happens and they see that, and that all the stereotypical arguments that, come about when the state legislature says, oh, we are considering, casinos or gaming in the state, and somebody trots out all of these old stereotypical notions about, well, property values are going to go down, crime's going to go up, and then they see what happens, and they see we create a lot of jobs, we create economic activity that then creates spillover effects and create, and so the casino comes in, and then there's a hotel, and then there's 2 more restaurants, and then there's a retail element to it, all in a town or area that had been depressed for decades. And then I can repeat that tale, dozens and dozens of times all over this country. And so our view is, when you have that story to tell, and that's in the commercial side, in the tribal side, it's even more compelling, right? Mm-hmm. Here's people in this country that have been treated terribly by the American government for hundreds of years. And tribal casino gaming has been nothing short of transformational to people that have been treated terribly in this country. They've been forced to leave their homes and move to, reservations, in the middle of the country. And they've now been able to, through, compacts with the states and recognition by the federal government, to open up casinos to try and rebuild after generations of unbelievable hardship. And so I think that we have a very good story to tell in terms of what we mean to the communities and the peoples that we empower. And so, there's always worries about, regulation and federal government, but man, we've got a lot of important allies in communities all over the country that will stand up and say, these are good actors. They came to our community and we didn't know what they were going to look like. And they have been, they have been, every bit as good as what we hoped.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I wanted to move on slightly to sort of more the business growth aspect. I suppose could be taken as a two-part question, but what areas in the coming year do you see as the fastest growing for the industry? And then as an addendum, what about the future of online casinos? Because we all know that mobile sports betting has boomed in over 30 states now, but online casinos are still at 6, 7 states or about to be 7. So do you see that as a growing force in American life? And do you perhaps know of some states where it's about to come live or will come live in the next year or so?
Well, it's a great question, and it kind of makes me pause and reflect a little bit, because when we think about what we've all gone through, right, with COVID, and what we're still going through, right? We still don't have business travel back. We still have limited international travel. We have limited conventions and conferences, and some of the things that really, particularly in places like Las Vegas, they drive business, and that stuff still hasn't come back. It's come back to some degree, business travel, but conferences, conventions, international travel is still extremely limited. But what we learned and what the operators learned during COVID was, number one, the online presence, them having an online presence when all 989 casinos in America were shut down for months, was that online created a lifeline in essence for many of these companies. And for many of these companies that had experimented with or even thought that they were a threat to the brick and mortar business, they recognized that there was an opportunity to reset their business vision for their companies. And what I mean by that is they saw that there was a high value in this existential threat that they all faced during COVID of, we have no people, that we can't let people come into our properties, and actually did some amazing things with, COVID testing and, creating vaccination sites on properties in many of our casinos around the country. But that they recognized that when we reopened, that this online piece should continue, and that it was rethought by, I would say, leadership across the industry, that it isn't an either or. It isn't online succeeds and brick and mortar fails. It is really about creating an omni-channel experience for consumers, and the ability for the brand to speak with the consumers a lot more often than they could only on the visits to the property. And so if you had, whether it's a regional property or a national property with, a presence in Las Vegas, but also presence in different states around the country, you might get them to come and visit you physically 5 or 10 times in a year. But by being part of a loyalty program and offering the online options, you also get to communicate with them, 365 days a year. You get a better understanding of what music acts you like, what food you like, what things you like to bet on in terms of sports, and creating this 365 communication with customers is really what successful businesses are doing, whether it be in the gaming industry or not. And I think that there was an important evolution that took place in our industry that said, you know what, this isn't either or, this is both. And that, yes, online has shown strong growth whether it be in mobile betting, in sports, or in iGaming. It's still in a limited number of states. And we think that that will increase. But I think that it will increase in conjunction with the continued success of brick and mortar. And I think we saw that. I mean, like we went from when I took this job, it was 2019, and we had the greatest year in the record of the industry. Then we had 2020 was the worst year in the history of the industry, and 2021 was the best, right? $53 billion, crossed $53 billion in just commercial gaming revenue. And my expectation is that tribal tracks very similarly in the states here. And so we're talking about $100 billion, like probably, and sports betting still a small piece of it. It's 4.3 billion. But but if you think about sports betting and iGaming today, it's still only 15% of the revenue nationally. It is growing. It is an important component. But I think that the level of concern among people that run brick and mortar casinos, they've all built better strategies around how to embrace it and how to take advantage of it, rather than say, oh my God, we're a bookstore and Amazon is going to come and Amazon is going to put all of us bookstores out of business. I think that they've all recognized that there is a way to synergistically build iGaming and mobile sports betting into the brand, and I think that that's what I see in this year and going forward, is that we'll see continued growth in the iGaming space and in the online and mobile, and we'll see additional states. I don't know exactly which ones, but it's amazing. Going back to what we talked about before in sports betting, we've got 33 states plus DC that are legal and 30 that are live. And this is in 2.5 years since PASPA was repealed. So, I've been lobbying most of my life. Like I said, been in government or lobbying most of my life. I've never seen anything move this quickly in as many states as sports betting. And I think that will, continue because, as we said before, people have been betting on sports as long as there have been sports to bet on. But because of the federal government previously, they could only bet legally on sports in Nevada, and they had to use the illegal market everywhere else.
Sure. There are detractors who would say that with all this betting, even though now it's just legal, it has been illegal before, but I suppose they're tracking instances of problem gambling more. And I was wondering what your view was on how operators could address problem gambling in a more effective manner than they have, or perhaps some operators have done an excellent job in addressing it. What could be done to treat this issue more effectively?
Well, I think that responsible gaming and commitment to addressing problem gambling is core to our success. You can't have a long-term business if people believe that you're predatory. And I study a lot of things that have happened in other jurisdictions, whether it be the UK or Australia or Spain or Italy, in particularly as it relates to sports betting, but fixed betting odds terminals and these other things. If the industry loses credibility around the issue of problem gambling and responsibility, all of those issues that we talked about previously, the worry about federal overreach, of this is not an industry that can be regulated at the state level. It needs federal protection. That happens when we're irresponsible. And my view is that the industry is committed to ensuring that, that players understand that this is fun, that this should be done in a budget conscious manner. And that, and we've launched our own, significant PSA campaign, if you will, called Have a Game Plan, which, we know because we're licensed and our licenses are at risk if we're seen to be predatory or if we're seen to be irresponsible with our players and our customers. And so that commitment is real to our industry, and will always be real to our industry, because the cautionary tales are not hard to find. They are very easy to look across the pond, either Australia or in Europe, that what happens if the industry doesn't prioritize responsibility. And so you see it as sports betting is growing in this incredible manner. We are licensed, but we have all these new, I call them all these new business partners. We've got leagues and teams and arenas and stadiums and broadcasters, and all of which see significant financial opportunities because of sports betting. And not really, they don't own the responsibility in the same way we do. And so we have been evangelizing, I think evangelizing is the right word, evangelizing to all of our new business partners that, look, there's great opportunities here, but there is also responsibility. And we need to make sure that they are part of the education of sports fans about this new legal opportunity, and that this new legal opportunity should be done as a form of entertainment, and that it should be done with an eye towards making sure that you have a budget and you stick to that budget, and that you bet socially, and that you're not going to solve your financial problems by betting on a football game. And that we need, and we have seen incredible change. Remember, before the Supreme Court ruled on PASPA, all of the leagues were against the opening up of legalized gambling in America and sports betting. And now they're all partners. Every single league, every single, in states in which sports betting is legal, they've all created sports marketing, advertising deals, data deals. And we all think that that's good and important. And what we continue to try and stress to all of our new business partners is to ensure that they bake in responsibility as part of their efforts to grow the legal market. And I do think that, and there's certainly been, discussion about, the amount of advertising and in some of these states where we have new sports betting becomes legal. And yeah, there has been a lot of advertising, but you have to remember why. The why is that we are trying to pull consumers who have been betting on sports illegally for decades, and we want to bring them into the legal framework. We want to bring them into a safe, regulated sports betting framework that that they didn't know existed, or quite frankly, they didn't know was illegal what they were doing. Because if you can go on and do a Google search of bet on sports, you can find offshore, online, illegal websites, and you can bet on them pretty easily. And so, go back to what we talked about, what the federal government should do. To the degree that we can, really help to help create better levels of enforcement on websites that promote illegal websites, and do work to try and shut down the illegal offshore market. That'd be a huge help, because that would help the states, it would help the consumers, and it would continue to help build a healthy legal ecosystem that is still nascent. And so when people talk about, well, what about all this advertising? Isn't that worrisome? It's worrisome if you're a shareholder in one of these sports betting companies, and you're wondering, when is it going to end? When are we going to start making money? Because we can't keep spending hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising and not start to make money. But you see that with tech companies in general, right? You have to get to this place where, right now it's acquiring consumers, it's building databases, and that then there will be a way to monetize that. And so the market will by and large rationalize. I think it will by and large figure itself out. And we even saw that last year, where you had this huge spike in the early weeks of the NFL season. But then as the season kind of went on, you started to, see the declining advertising, mostly because when you got the, you got the early customers, you got the low hanging fruit, if you will, all of a sudden it gets more and more expensive to convert someone from someone who watches an ad to a customer. And as that expense goes up, the corporate structures start and shareholders start to say, we need better performance out of you. We need to see kind of what do you know, like you can't continue to just burn advertising at this crazy level and expect us on Wall Street to be supportive of it. And I think that that dynamic has already been playing itself out, and that the operators have recognized that there is a limit to how much you can move the illegal market to the legal market with advertising alone.
Mm-hmm. And how long do you think before profitability, comes out ahead of all this advertising?
I'd be up on Wall Street if I could answer that question. Look, I think that these companies, it's interesting, right? Because if you think about advertising, where advertising happens, it's typically happening regionally because it's happening when a state goes live. And so that's where you see these spurts of advertising dollars. And it's because the legislature just opened it up. And so I think that will probably continue in terms of, when a big state, we've still got a number of states around the country that haven't yet, opened up to sports betting, California, Texas, Florida, Georgia, like you've got some big states that are sitting out there that don't have sports betting now. And so I would imagine that, when, I don't think it's if, but when, sports betting goes live in any of those states, you'll probably see a lot of advertising because there'll be a lot of customers in Florida or California or Texas that are betting illegally today, that will be able, that they believe they can convert to the legal market. And so that advertising, you'll see that, and you'll probably see that at the beginning of, the NFL and college football season next year, or maybe around March Madness. But you won't, I think that the days of the days that of last fall, when really this was the first year where you had fans back in stadiums where so they could bet in play, do in play betting, and that that really we started to see a more normalized sporting schedule, as well as a number of other pretty big states come online for legal operationally for sports betting. That we've gotten a lot of new advertising that came into new markets. And so I think it will be when there's a couple, one or two maybe new big markets that come, we'll see advertising blitzes again. But I think that it all came from, we have an illegal market that has decades of head start on us. How can we move them into the legal market through our platforms? And I think it's very rational. And it has there is a point when as a business, you make a business decision to say, is it worth running this much advertising and to get X number of customers? And that number is different probably for every company, but the analysts up on Wall Street that look at this and say, all right, so you ran this many ads, you converted them to this many customers. Do we like that or we don't like that? That's kind of the dynamic that then kind of plays into how the analysts view the stocks.
Sure. Well, Mr. Miller, that's the extent of my questions for today. Thanks so much for sitting down with us. Much appreciated.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Okay.